So when I look at a strategic Bitcoin reserve and its ability to grow and help me right the wrongs that my generation did by driving us into this terrible debt, it's the only vehicle I see that can have that consequential an effect. The strategic Bitcoin reserve can help people in my generation right the wrongs that we did to your generation and generations to follow. And I feel deeply committed to making that happen.
All right, we are here in beautiful Washington, D.C., the day after a historical inauguration, the inauguration of Donald J. Trump for president. I'm joined here with the Bitcoin senator, Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, and of course, Dennis Porter of the Satoshi Action Fund. Senator Lummis, you had I would say, a historic keynote at the Nashville 2024 conference. You talked about the Bitcoin Act. I just want to read a little bit of the notes. It will introduce a strategic Bitcoin reserve in the United States with the plan to acquire up to 5% of the Bitcoin supply, or 1 million Bitcoin, and a holding period of a minimum of 20 years. How would the Bitcoin Act benefit Americans?
Well, Nico, thanks for the question. I did raise it at Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville, and I spoke right after President Trump. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be the most anticlimactic remarks anybody's ever given coming after Trump. But the wonderful thing was that President Trump advocated in his remarks, which preceded mine, for a strategic Bitcoin stockpile. And so it gave complete entree for me to roll out the Bitcoin Act. What it will do, as you just said, is create a strategic Bitcoin reserve of 5% of all Bitcoin over a 5-year period, and then hold it for 20 years, as you just pointed out, not by raising taxes and investing in Bitcoin, but by using existing assets within the Federal Reserve System and Treasury. And then we'll have a hard asset that will grow in value. So 20 years after the full implementation of the 200,000 Bitcoin per year until we have 1 million Bitcoin, will cut our current debt in half. And that's using models that project the growth of Bitcoin. So we can use it during the years that it's growing to underpin and shore up the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. And having the US dollar as the world's reserve currency is extremely important to support through this century. So it gives us favorable trade advantages. It ensures that the US dollar is the most accepted currency worldwide. And then with Bitcoin underpinning it and being also a global means of exchange and store of value, gives us that double support for the US dollar.
Absolutely. So, Senator, you have been in the vanguard of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Initiative on the federal level. Dennis, you've been in the vanguard of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve on the state level. I'm just going to name a couple states off the top of my head. The great state of Ohio, the great state of Pennsylvania, the great state of Florida. I believe some news just came out of there recently. And I know I'm missing a couple. So what is the importance of really moving this initiative forward on the state level?
Yeah, it's a great question. And also what an honor to be with you here today, Senator Lummis and Nico. Thank you for all the incredible stuff that you do on the content side. For me, I certainly am very bullish and very supportive of the legislation at the federal level. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the states would really benefit from having a strategic Bitcoin reserve because the states don't have an unlimited money printer. They don't have unlimited budgets. And so they're dealing with massive budget shortfalls and the inability to protect the purchasing power of the money that they currently have on hand, the money that they currently get through taxation. And that's a huge problem. Since 2018, the dollar has lost 25% of its purchasing power. That's a huge hit to the budgets of states who, again, do not have the ability to print unlimited money. And so by having a strategic Bitcoin reserve, even a very small percent, we're not talking about 50 or even 25% of their budget. We're even talking about single digit amounts of their budget being in, or their rainy day funds being in Bitcoin. They have the ability to protect themselves from the debasement that is occurring at the federal level and ensure that they can continue to pay for the programs that they currently have without having to raise taxes.
Absolutely. I feel a little bit of competition. Who do you think is going to be first? The federal level, Strategic Bitcoin Reserve, or state level, Senator Lummis?
Having been my state's treasurer and served in the Wyoming legislature, I think the states are going to be first. States are the innovators of the country. They're the incubators of innovation. And so I think some of these states are going to see the advantages first. Dennis described them well. I was my state's treasurer. I wanted to diversify our sovereign wealth fund. We have a permanent mineral trust fund. So it's like an endowment or a sovereign wealth fund. And when I was state treasurer, I got to diversify our asset allocation out of just bonds into a fully diversified asset allocation of stocks and bonds. This is one of those buy and hold assets. So you can have it continue to grow, as Dennis said, while our own dollar is declining in value. The US dollar is designed to decline in value because the Federal Reserve has a 2% inflation target every year. So by design, it's falling in value. The salary that U.S. senators get, which has been flat, the same, since 2009, is $174,000 a year per senator. Today, that salary that I was paid when I got here in 2009 buys about $122,000 worth of rent, food, and living expense for here in Washington. So the dollar has declined. Bitcoin has grown that whole time. And it has grown, if you look at its history, about 55% each year. And of course it fluctuates, but it's fluctuating upward, where the US dollar is fluctuating less, but fluctuating downward.
Absolutely. So, Senator, what's the status of the bill? We just had an election. Do you have support in the Senate to pass this?
We are working right now to identify a bipartisan coalition to get it passed. We want to make sure that this is bipartisan, and it has to be to get the 60-vote threshold required in the U.S. Senate. And I've been working with colleagues in the House to promote this idea, and we're having good success. We're not there yet, but we're having good success.
Glad to hear it. Dennis, same question to you. There's been a lot of these bills introduced on the state level. Which state do you believe is going to be first?
Well, I know which one I believe is going to be first, but before I get there, I do want to just go back to what the senator had said about the ability to incubate great ideas at the state level. We call it the laboratory of democracy. We can take those cutting edge innovative ideas, which really the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve legislative idea has been something that you've championed so well. And we're just proud to be able to pick up that mantle and carry it forward at the state level, where we have now 11 states that have introduced Strategic Bitcoin Reserve legislation. We think we'll get to 15 within 2025 alone. It could be many more than that. And some states will have multiple bills because lawmakers are now competing to be the first one in their own state. But we had a space this week, and so now I can publicly say it, just yesterday announced that Utah was the 11th state to introduce Strategic Bitcoin Reserve legislation. And people ask me, well, who's going to be first? Well, there's a very, very, very good shot that Utah will be first because they have such a short legislative calendar. It is only 45 days. And so it's either sink or swim in 45 days. No one else has a faster calendar, and no one else has more political momentum and willpower to get it done. The state of Utah has a task force, a digital asset task force that meets in the off season. And it's filled with lawmakers and has the treasurer in there as well. And every off season, when they're not meeting, because they're part-time, Congress meets year round, states oftentimes meet part-time. Well, they meet in the off season for the state of Utah, and they pre-vote on bills to see which ones they want to try to get that political momentum behind. Every single bill that has come out of that task force has ultimately passed into law over the last several years. And our strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation just passed out of that task force. So not only do they have the political momentum, but they have the timeline on their side. So we firmly believe that Utah will be the very first state to introduce this legislation, which is key. And we should give a real quick note to the legislators in Utah who did such an incredible job running their state. They're top ranked across the country. And they also last year passed a bill to allow the purchase of gold and silver. And we more or less amended or already pre-existing legislation that came out of Utah, which is seen as a policy leader, to say, let's include Bitcoin. They agreed with that. We've been moving forward with it. The task force approved it. They have the shortest timeline, and we think we're going to get it done in the state of Utah.
Absolutely. Is that big breaking? Is that Dennis breaking?
That's breaking.
Great to hear. Senator Lummis, Trump was just sworn into office yesterday. How close are you working with the Trump administration in regards to the strategic Bitcoin reserve?
Yeah, we're working very closely with them, and we know that there are a number of pro-digital asset appointees within his administration, people who are favorable towards both our framework for digital assets within the SEC, the CFTC, and other regulatory agencies, but also a strategic Bitcoin reserve. So we'll be working with his treasurer nominee, Mr. Bessent. We'll be working with his crypto czar, with the SEC appointees, the CFTC appointee. We're very excited that Hester Peirce, who is at SEC and who is very knowledgeable about digital assets, will be the lead SEC commissioner on this issue. We're excited about reform at the FDIC. We need reform at the Fed, the bank supervision component of the Fed in particular. And so we are working regularly with the White House. And then, interestingly, there are other advocates within the administration that are not specifically within the rubric of financial control. For example, RFK, who hopefully will be confirmed at HHS, Health and Human Services, is an ardent supporter of a Bitcoin strategic reserve. He proposed a bigger one than I proposed at Bitcoin 2024. And then there are other advocates like him, Kash Patel, who's going to be at Justice, is interestingly someone with whom I've had really great conversations about digital assets and Bitcoin specifically. So this is a very different looking cabinet and White House than the last one when it comes to understanding digital assets. And so many people, it sounds so foreign to them that they just don't even want to take the time. And I admit, it does take time. It took me a long time to really dive in enough to Bitcoin that I understood it. It's an age-related syndrome that we have because it's so new. But some of us, people my age, baby boomers, forget that we hardly ever see cash anymore. We're dealing with credit cards and statements and banknotes, and people loan us money. They're not handing it to us in cash. There's a system that is all electronic, already embedded in the U.S. economy. And so Bitcoin is the next step. It's the sort of natural progression from the current system. But for some people, it's just a step too far. And that's why what you're doing is so important, helping educate people about how significant and yet similar Bitcoin is. It's the next natural progression.
Absolutely. And also, Senator, I was doing some research. The Banking Committee launched a subcommittee on digital assets, and you were named the chair. You were tapped to be the chair. So congratulations on that. What is going to be the focus of that subcommittee? Why is that subcommittee necessary?
Well, I think it's very important because we'll get an opportunity finally to marry up Fit 21 that passed the U.S. House last year with Lummis Gillibrand, which is the bipartisan companion here in the Senate, will be able to hopefully dovetail and meld some of the differences between those bills and get a regulatory framework on the books. Right now, a lot of regulation is happening by slapping fines on companies that are custodying assets or working in other ways with digital assets. And they're paying tens of millions of dollars in legal fees to lawyers to try to defend what they're doing when there is no clear regulatory framework. They're trying to comply, but instead of being told how to comply, they're being slapped with enforcement actions. So it will be very beneficial to have a framework in statute so people know how to comply with the regulatory framework expected of them to do business in the United States. And President Trump has said loud and clear that he wants the United States to be the global leader in these policies. And so we're setting out to do that. So also with the framework, we want to make sure that there's a stablecoin bill. We want to make sure that we have an opportunity to have a strategic Bitcoin reserve on the books that includes protection for individuals, individual wallets, that creates that sovereign ability to own Bitcoin and protect it in statute. You'll recall over time, people held gold and the United States made them surrender it to the government. We want to make sure that never happens with Bitcoin. And we're proposing a reserve for Bitcoin for the United States that's the same size as our current gold holdings, but that protects the ability of individuals to have their individual wallets. The other component of our bill is to make sure that states, if they want to, can participate in these disparate holdings of Bitcoin that are extremely secure and protected. So we think that this bill is the right framework to move forward. So those are the three early priorities. There will be others. We will be holding hearings on Choke Point 2.0. Honestly, it's shocking how the past administration debanked digital assets, oil, gas, coal, ammunition, guns. The Trumps were debanked. They were at Signature Bank. Gemini was debanked. Silvergate Bank was assassinated. It was never insolvent, and they drove it out. What the government did to Americans by debanking them should never happen again.
Of course. And I'm so glad that you're talking about passing legislation to protect the individual's right to take self-custody of their Bitcoin. I think that's incredibly important. Dennis, I know that you have successfully passed bills on that specific subject on the state level. I believe it was Montana, but a couple states have passed laws to protect the right to self-custody. And then I want to go back to Operation Choke Point 2.0.
Yes. Well, for me, taking a step back to how Satoshi Action started in the first place was that it was the middle of the shutdowns and everybody was really worried about the direction the country was headed in with regards to Bitcoin. We saw what the current administration was moving towards. And I just thought to myself, man, I'm about to be possibly faced with the idea of either giving up my Bitcoin or fleeing the country or going underground. None of these are good options. I'd grown up in a family that really cared about engaging politically, and I realized that this is the time in my life that I needed to engage politically, not just to protect my own rights, of course, to access Bitcoin, but the rights of others across the country as well. And so that's why the very, very first thing that we did at Satoshi Action was to protect the right to access Bitcoin. So we protected the right to mine, protected the right to self-custody, the right to run a node, and the right to peer-to-peer transactions in 4 different states now. Very different variations of that policy are now in those 4 states, signed into law by 4 different governors who all agreed we should be ensuring that Americans can access technology, whether it's Bitcoin or anything else. And so it was a fairly rational conversation to have with those lawmakers who got on board pretty quickly to see the value of the policy. We're continuing to push that objective forward. Strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation is the exciting thing that everybody is talking about. But we are going to be staying dedicated and focused on passing Bitcoin rights, and very excited to see that the senator agrees and is also working on passing that at the federal level as well, because everything that we do at the state level is a sort of a backstop, and it is a plan B, so to speak, of its own, where if we can't get anything done at the federal level, we continue to build that political momentum. We show the Americans and we show the policymakers that this stuff is rational and achievable policy that lawmakers are willing to get behind or put their name on. And so we have these 6 or 7 states that are going to be working on that policy this year. We're confident we're going to continue to expand those rights so that we create a bulwark of states that can protect Bitcoiners and ensure that they can exist here in the United States without fear of federal overreach. And it's something that I care a lot about, even though it's not the shiny SBR project, but it's something that is desperately needed. And I'm glad to see that there's going to be a federal effort in this regard as well.
When state governments and the federal governments compete for your Bitcoin, I think you win as a Bitcoiner. So glad to hear it. So Operation Choke Point 2.0. I have a news show. I do it Monday through Friday, and Senator Lummis, mid-time last year, I thought I was going to have to move to El Salvador. Wasn't not kidding when I say that. The arrest of the Samurai Wallet developers, the actions by the Treasury, the proposed 30% Bitcoin mining tax. I had a conversation with Caitlin Long with Custodia Bank. She literally told me when she came on my show, she said, they denied my federal banking charter. That order came directly from the White House. And it was pretty scary to be a Bitcoin entrepreneur in the United States. I really feel like our industry was targeted. Now, earlier on this week, coming out of your X account, Senator Lummis, you said that the FDIC, that there was a whistleblowers, that the FDIC was destroying documents in regards to what was happening in the background. Do you have any details in regards to that? What happened last year?
Oh my gosh. Well, so we understand through whistleblowers that there has been document destruction going on in the last few days at the FDIC. So we're sending a letter saying, stop destroying documents. We need you to preserve your records. We know that there are personnel changes happening quickly at the FDIC. Some people may want to protect themselves from the reach of federal subpoenas. It is unconscionable what they've done to the American people. I mean, when you think about just the way our country was established, that we're establishing this government, and this government is here to serve us. Well, it's been flipped on its head. At the FDIC, at the Fed, and elsewhere within government, they want us to serve them. And if they say, we don't like oil and gas, we don't like digital assets, we don't like Bitcoin, and we don't like it so much that we're not going to let you have bank accounts. And that is what has happened. So people who not only are going to get a new account and are being denied, but people who have existing accounts are getting kicked off the banking system, including payroll. There are businesses that were kicked out of banking just before they were trying to make payroll for their employees. If you're an employee and all of a sudden your employer can't write a check that you can cash out of a bank account, what are you going to think of the business? It is so it's almost unbelievable that our government would do this to us, but they have. And we're going to expose it, and we're going to remediate this and make sure it can never happen again in this country. We saw it happen in Canada. You know, remember when the truckers were trying to cross the border without proving they'd had a COVID test? And the government shut down their bank accounts and even shut down the bank accounts of people who were contributing to them in solidarity with their surrounding the Capitol to plead their case. none of us have ever seen this. It just seems like something out of another century. And so this is something that has to be addressed.
Guys, I want to tell you about our sponsor, BitcoinWell.com. It's the best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. What makes Bitcoin Well different is that it's a completely non-custodial platform, which means as soon as you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well and the funds clear, they go straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address. Enable your independence today with the fastest and safest way to buy Bitcoin in Canada and the United States. Head over to bitcoinwell.com to get started. Senator, and this is something that me and Dennis speak at length about, the necessity for Bitcoin to be a bipartisan issue, not a partisan issue. What worries me a little bit is, how do I say this nicely? The last 3 or 4 years shown that perhaps not everyone on the other side of the aisle, but it seems like a certain party feels a certain way about Bitcoin. Is that monolithic? Are there people on the Democratic Party, or there senators and congressmen and women that are willing to work with you on this?
Absolutely. And how I'd parse it is this. There was a certain White House that opposed this. That doesn't necessarily translate to the whole party. So you have Kirsten Gillibrand, who has been doggedly supportive of this, very knowledgeable. She practiced securities law in New York for 12 years minimum. She has been doggedly supportive of what we're doing. Ron Wyden and I tried to team up when they had that really ridiculous definition of broker about 3.5 years ago that said Bitcoin miners need to report because they have data about their ultimate customers. I don't know a single miner, unless they're holding it themselves, that knows who's buying their Bitcoin. I mean, it was the stupidest thing. That came out of the administration. Ron Wyden and I fought that. So he's conversant. I know he has spent time at Bitcoin Commons in Austin, Ro Khanna in the House, and several other Democrats. And when FIT 21, the regulatory framework the House passed, I think they had something like 80 Democrats. So I think it's not the Democrat Party that's opposed. I think it was the White House. And I think that it was largely the circle of friends that Elizabeth Warren is tremendously influential with. She is wicked smart, but she does not like this asset.
Why does she like it, Senator?
I don't know. I look forward to that conversation, and we're going to have it because she's the ranking member of the Banking Committee.
Mm-hmm. So let me follow up with that, and I want to go to Dennis. So there was an act that was passed, the CBDC Anti-Surveillance State Act, and it seems like the voting went across party lines. It was 216 to 192. Who would be pro CBDC?
That's a great question. I do think that there is more of a general trust of government among a lot of Democrats than there are among Republicans. And so the idea of a central bank digital currency is it's not anathema to them, whereas to a lot of Republicans who want smaller government, believe in states' rights over federal rights, individual rights over either state or government, federal government rights, we're the types that our brains are wired to not want a CBDC, because we've seen how the Chinese digital yuan is being used as a means of surveillance. And we don't want our government surveilling on us with the direct-to-retail CBDC. And really, the Fed doesn't need a CBDC to engage with other central banks. They already have frictionless transfers among the central banks of the world. So they don't really need it. And direct to retail, we don't want it.
Absolutely. Dennis, do you want to follow up on that? Because I believe the state of Florida, specifically on the state level, I love how you described the importance of the states and how that's really moving things forward. So on the state level, I believe the state of Florida passed a bill to specifically ban central bank digital currencies.
There's been a number of states that have made policy efforts in this regard, and we would love to see more concern around CBDCs. I think the direct to retail is, of course, the biggest area for concern. We don't want consumers having direct access to CBDCs. Now, if a bank wants to send a CBDC to another bank, I think that's a little less concerning. But on the notion of going back to this sort of like bipartisan component around Bitcoin, it's really important that people keep in mind that I do agree with you that it was from the White House, and maybe even more so just from Senator Warren and the folks that she's around who don't like this technology, which is unfortunate, and hopefully that can change. Hopefully we can have those conversations, because I see this in real time. And Twitter is not real life, is what I like to say to people. And I'm in the trenches, the senator's in the trenches, we're having these conversations, so we know there are Democrats that are supportive of this technology. In fact, in the state of Massachusetts, we just announced last week that there's a bill introduction there, actually multiple bill introductions there, for a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill. And it's from 2 Democrats and 1 Republican. And so there is bipartisan support, even for what people would consider to be the most cutting edge policy in Bitcoin. And I'm proud to say there's another state we're going to be announcing here very shortly that is going to be working on Bitcoin rights, which is a deep, deep, deep blue state. And there's going to be broad support within the state, I believe, where we're going to be working there this week even to continue to build that support. So I'm having these conversations, not just with lawmakers, but even with average Joe Bitcoiners. And I see that broad support. Of course, Republicans deserve all the credit in the world for being the ones leading on this issue, being the ones taking up the mantle, taking charge of the issue, and fighting for Bitcoin, especially the senator, fighting for Bitcoin when no one else was fighting for Bitcoin. But we do want to have this be a bipartisan thing, because the Senate is really where it's at. You cannot get things done in the Senate without bipartisan support, unless, of course, Republicans want to, have a much larger majority, grow their majority. But it's really tough for one party to get that many seats in the Senate in order to just do whatever they think is the right thing to do. So we need to get senators on board. We need to get 4 Democrat senators on board, really, to seal the deal on a lot of these pro-Bitcoin policies that we want to get done at the federal level, and then even at the state level. We'll go to states that are deep, deep red. I mean, the reddest states that you could possibly be in. But there's always 1 or 2 Democrats, right? There's always a few of them that are there, because you've got big cities, and cities tend to be Democrat cities, they tend to turn blue. And so they can come in and they can cause a lot of trouble. I mean, even in the state of Missouri, as a quick example, there's very few Democrats there. It's a very red state. But the Senate is set up in a way where one senator at the end of what is a very short session can just trade out with another senator and filibuster till the whole thing is over and they don't pass anything. So even though you might have a majority or even a supermajority, it's really important that you have both sides on board. And that's true if things switch the other direction. We're going to always want to make sure that we have allies in both parties to ensure that we can make progress with Bitcoin. We're at this place right now where we are fighting over whether or not we should do Bitcoin, but we need to transition over to how we do Bitcoin. And I think we're very, very close to doing that. Thanks in large part to your office and to the senator for leading on it, but also many other Democrats who are willing to be out there pro-Bitcoin, even when the White House is telling them not to be.
Absolutely. Senator, what message do you have to Americans that are potentially on the fence about Bitcoin's benefits?
Bitcoin is like digital gold. Bitcoin has that enduring hard quality. It can be divided in any number of ways. So it's infinitely divisible. Once it is produced, it participates in a pool of scarcity. There will only be 21 million Bitcoin ever mined. And we know that the very definition of inflation, things that go up in value, is too much money chasing too few goods. So when you have built-in scarcity, you have an asset that's almost protected to go up in value. That's part of the problem with the US dollar. We do have a printing press here in Washington. We can crank out US dollars 24/7, and it drives down the value of the goods that can be purchased with those dollars. We know that Bitcoin will always buy more. And as both a means of exchange, which it's going to come into its own as, and what I like to use it for is a store of value where you buy and hold. You know you have something of permanence that can't be stolen from you if you're protective of your private keys, that is yours and yours alone. We had knowledge of an individual who did not want to be conscripted to fight the war in Ukraine. This was a Russian man. And he memorized his private keys. He walked out of the country to go on vacation. He took his wealth with him in his mind. And he moved to a free country. And he didn't have to go fight a war he didn't believe in. I mean, this is the kind of individual freedom that Bitcoin provides to people. So I feel more strongly about Bitcoin as a source of individual freedom and the sovereign of the very individual person than I even do about it as a government asset that can shore up the value of the dollar. This really is freedom money.
Absolutely. Dennis, I want to ask you, what can individuals do to speed up the adoption of Bitcoin on the state level?
Well, absolutely. There's so many ways that people can speed up the adoption of Bitcoin by engaging with their lawmakers and regulators. And we regularly tell people that even just writing a letter to your lawmaker can make a huge, huge difference. And that by starting at that local level, you can have a huge impact as well, because the state lawmakers are willing to try out.
Do they actually read the letter?
Oh yeah, they do. They absolutely do. And they also respond to them and they interact with them. Well, and you know, sometimes when they get too many letters, it's hard to get through them all. But they absolutely do. And at bare minimum, maybe it's a busy time, they ask, how many letters have we gotten about this issue? And where do they stand on the issue? And then the staff will tell them, okay, this is how many letters we got and this is what people said. That really does impact a lawmaker as well, because oftentimes they're getting letters from their constituents. And at the end of the day, lawmakers are accountable to the vote of the people. And so if they're hearing from their own constituents that this is where they stand, that's going to have a big impact. That's a very strong incentive for lawmakers to take an issue seriously. And given the size of the race, you know, a Senate race is hundreds of thousands or millions of people. A state race can be I was just talking to a state lawmaker in New Hampshire, 400 people that he represents, 500 people he represents. Imagine if the people in his community all of a sudden collectively started writing letters to their lawmakers and to that lawmaker and letting him know that they support Bitcoin. It's just a big difference, the impact you can have at the state level. And that's why I always encourage people, yes, go to DC, and yes, talk to your lawmakers in DC and you know, try to meet them on the ground when they're home. But those state lawmakers are much more accessible. They are much easier, I wouldn't say easier, but it's more possible to impact them than it would ever be with a member of Congress. And they have the ability, I think, to really be on the cutting edge of policy for Bitcoin. They can do things like Bitcoin rights. They can do things like strategic Bitcoin reserve legislation, and they don't have to worry about their career falling apart. You know, we're here in the Senate. This is the pinnacle of sort of political career for a lot of these folks here in this building. And so they don't want to mess that up, right? The state lawmakers, they're just starting out. It's all fresh, it's all new. They're willing to try things out. They're willing to experiment. They don't have the cameras and the lights on them, so they're willing to get away with a little bit more of a rough path towards where they want to go. So I do encourage people strongly to reach out to their lawmakers and to engage them, especially at the state level, and to also show up at their events. You know, donate to these lawmakers too. They pay a lot of attention to people that donate to them. We all know that. So support their campaigns, especially if they're pro-Bitcoin. Give them more ability to be more effective for Bitcoin in the long run. So I certainly believe that's probably one of the most important things that people could do, is just that direct engagement with their lawmakers.
Reach out and it actually works. That's
what we do.
Okay.
Our whole entire organization at Satoshi Action is built around that thesis of engage lawmakers at the state level, certainly the federal level as well. Have conversations with them, educate them on Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining, the value of it, how Bitcoin mining can balance the grid, how Bitcoin itself, the asset, can create freedom for individuals. And then once they like Bitcoin as much as you and me, then turn around and say, hey, well, for Satoshi Action, it's look at these model policies that we've been able to put together. Not only have we been able to pass them in Montana, Louisiana, Arkansas, and Oklahoma, but there's other states considering this. Look at Utah. Utah's a leader on policy. They can do this. If they can do this, any state can do it. So if you're not Satoshi Action, if you're not working with us, you can point people to us as well and say, hey, this is a team that you should speak to who can make a big difference and can come in and act as a resource. A lot of lawmakers at the state level, the big disadvantage they have is they don't have the resources. They don't have the income. Some of them don't even have a single staff member that's helping them. Imagine trying to cover all the important issues to a state and you don't even have one person helping you. So what we can do is we can come in as the issue expert. And that's what the lawmaker in Utah said. It's what the lawmaker in New Hampshire said when we jumped on a Spaces. And it's even what the lawmaker in Texas said when we jumped on a Spaces, is we can come in as the issue expert and on very simple things like the definition of Bitcoin, which, you would think that would be easy to do. But if you say a decentralized currency based off the white paper, you might start including other things in there as well, like Bitcoin Cash and other variations of Bitcoin. So even something as simple as that, coming in to help them and make sure that they don't make any mistakes on something it's just so average as a definition, can help them avoid political miscalculations and help ensure that the bill passes into law. And then again, they turn around and they go, well, you helped us once, we want you to help us again. And we've been seeing that all across the country. We're very fortunate to be in the position we are in today.
Senator Lummis, we're getting to the top of the interview. I appreciate that, Dennis. And you two, on the federal level, Senator Lummis, Dennis Porter, on the state level, you guys are the vanguard of the Strategic Bitcoin Reserve Initiative in the United States. Senator Lummis, last question. You've claimed that Bitcoin can be used to cut the national debt by half. I believe the year was 2045?
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
What is the process? Could you break that down?
Yeah, let's say that we did convert some of our existing assets into Bitcoin. 200,000 a year for 5 years. Hold for 20 years. Over that time, we've modeled it. We know that since inception, Bitcoin has grown about 55% per year. But that number is not infinitely sustainable. It's going to start declining. So on a decline curve, it'll go to 45, 35, 25. And we've projected it out. So in 20 years, we believe that a $1 million reserve 20 years from now would be roughly half of our current national debt. Now, RFK used the same modeling and projected his proposal out to where our existing national debt would be gone. But it was a much bigger number. So what we have to hope for and work for here at the federal level is reducing our spending, seeing where President Trump's tariff proposals get us in terms of our ability to collect revenue. So lower spending, higher revenue, and a reserve that can be used by the kids that my generation put in debt. I'm a Bitcoiner, but I'm also a baby boomer who has been participating in the federal government since 2009. When I came here, we had just turned from a national debt of $9 trillion to $10 trillion. And today we're like at $36 trillion. I'm embarrassed as a member of the baby boom generation with what I've done to you and my grandchildren. So when I look at a strategic Bitcoin reserve and its ability to grow and help me right the wrongs that my generation did by driving us into this terrible debt, it's the only vehicle I see that can have that consequential an effect. And that's why when I saw this come along, I was like, thank you, God, for bringing along. I've been toiling in politics since I was 23 years old. I was a state legislator in Wyoming when I was 24 years old. I'm 70 years old now. All that time, I've been looking for this bill. I'm not kidding. The Strategic Bitcoin Reserve can help people in my generation right the wrongs that we did to your generation and generations to follow. And I feel deeply committed to making that happen.
Extremely powerful. Senator Lummis, it's been an honor.
Thank you, Nico.